I'm going to tell you, Kaylee, everywhere I went, I took my children. So in the back
Oh,
seat with coloring books and, snacks and little juice boxes and little raisins and whatever I had, they were with me. And they would always say to me, Mommy, are we going to a client today?
we are live today with Miss Wendy Gladney. She has been a leader in our community for over 3 decades. She has worked with some of the leading Fortune 500 companies such as Nestle, USA, Hyundai, Motor America, Nike, Albertsons, and McDonald's. She has also served and worked with numerous nonprofits, small businesses, and entrepreneurs. She is also a coach, consultant, strategic engagement advisor, speaker, and author. But most of all, she is the purpose partner. Wendy helps women at crossroads figure out their next steps. She helps women become unshakable by healing wounds and helping them rebuild and rise to reach their fullest potential. I'm so excited to be chatting today with Miss Wendy Gladney.
Thank you so much. Well,
Of course.
hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So good to see you. You look beautiful today. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. You as well. You as well. Thank you so much. So I just want to start, let me know, where did you start? How did all of your accolades, like everything that you've done, how did this start? Especially as a mom and everything.
Yeah. Well, Kaylee, I would love to focus on the fact that your podcast emphasizes about being a mom, and so most of the direction that I'll take today will be all around, just even being a mom. So I am fortunate enough to have two children and three bonus children, and I have five grandchildren and
Wow.
three bonus grandchildren. So you could say our quiver is full. But let's go back a few years. So when I was in my 30s, I unfortunately experienced a divorce,
Mhm.
and at that time, I was a single mom of two younger children. And I had to figure out, what was I going to do? How was I going to make it? Now, my whole life is changing, and I'm going to have to figure out, okay, Wendy, what are you going to do? How are you going to take care of yourself? How are you going to take care of the kids? How are you going to keep your head up? What skills do you have? What is it that you really want to do? What is your passion? And of course, during that time, I was a little confused because I was in my 30s, and now I'm in my 60s. So that just seems like I was a youngin'. I was so young back then.
Definitely don't look 60.
As a matter of fact, in a few days, I'll be 64. Um, But I was in my 30s, and I just said, Lord, what do I do? How do I navigate through this? How do I make it? I want to succeed. I don't want to be a negative statistic as a single mother. And so prior to that, I had dabbled in a few things. I had done real estate. I was an actress at one time, did several different shows. But then eventually I started honing in on my skill set of organization. And someone came to me and said, you're really organized. And I used to do a lot of volunteer work for various charities and nonprofits fundraisers, like their gala balls and things like that. And someone came to me and said, you could make a living at this. And I said, make a living? What do you mean make a living? They said, you could charge. I said, charge what? Because I had always been a volunteer, so it's like,
Hmm.
how do you make money at this? And then one day, someone who happened to be a friend of the family, who still is an attorney, came to me and said, Wendy, I'm going to do this event. Well, actually, I have clients coming in from out of town. I want to host them. I want to do a couple of small little dinner events. Could you help me? And I was like, okay, sure. I'm thinking as a friend, help me and everything. He said, and I'll pay you. And I went, oh, ding, 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 ding. This is what they mean about you can get paid for this. And so that was the birth of my first company called Personal Services Plus, which is still around today. And Personal Services Plus started out as an event management firm that did meetings, conferences, seminars, and special events, including golf tournaments and all that. The one thing I didn't like was weddings. So I did very few weddings because I didn't like doing weddings because that was just not in my wheelhouse, really. Brides are
Okay.
very emotional. Uh, they change a lot, whereas when you deal with the business side of it, it's kind of a little bit more cut and dry. And
Mhm.
my job was really just to help them save money where possible and make as much money as possible. So I was
Okay.
really good at that and being very organized and putting the team together. So in 1992, is when I actually started Personal Services Plus. That's when we were officially launched, and I had my very first client. And I'm going to tell you, Kaylee, everywhere I went, I took my children. So in the
Oh.
back seat with coloring books and snacks and little juice boxes and little raisins and whatever I had, they were with me. And they would always say to me, "Mommy, are we going to a client today?" And back in those days too, it was always, "Mommy, are we going to the post office and then the bank?" Because they knew I had to go to the post office first to see if a check was there. And if there was a check there, then that means we went to the bank. So no check, no bank. And they grew with me with the business. They grew with me,
Mm.
and it was fun. And so a lot of my clients eventually started saying, "Where are your children? Where are they?" Because they were so used to seeing them with me. And nowadays I know parenting is different, and I respect everybody. But back then, if they started acting up, we gave them a look. I gave a look. I went like, "What are you doing? Sit down with that coloring book. What, mommy's working right now, And so then they would like, "Okay, okay, okay," and they would act right, And they also knew if they were good while mommy was working, that usually meant some kind of treat later, whether it was fast food that, I didn't care for, but it made it easier at the time, as a single mother. As a
Mhm.
single mother, there's some things you do that you don't always do later, like you cheat and get fast food maybe one day too many.
Well,
And
fast food back then, though, was created differently than it is now. So it's not too much of a oopsie back then.
but I was always cooked. I always cooked.
Mhm.
So our family cooks, and so anyway, it was nothing for me to cook and then pack them a little lunch, and that was their little snack. But
Mhm.
Kaylee, just to really kind of give you a little bit more for your listeners who may be wondering, what do I do? How do I? I'm a mom. I love being a mom, but yet I still want to either make a living or have a career, or maybe it's just extra money on the side, or maybe it's just using your God-given talents and you don't want to just sit on them. You want to use them.
How did you communicate with your clients, and how was that when you were like, hey, they came with me? Like, how did you communicate that, and you weren't afraid to lose any? Like, did you lose any clients with bringing your kids, or like how was that? Like, walk me through that.
Okay, so first of all, they didn't go to everything. If I
Okay.
was going to a board meeting, as they say, suited and booted, all dressed up and everything, they didn't go to that. But see, back then I focused more on event planning. And
Hmm.
so when you're planning events, it could be anywhere between a 2 to 6 month project, sometimes even 8 months, depending on the grandeur of the project and how big and what's all involved and so forth. Because at one time I had a major project for close to 11 years called King Week, in the city of Los Angeles, where I handled everything around Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. But it was a huge event that involved City Hall and various corporate accounts and things like that. So that was something I worked on probably 8 months out of the year.
Oh wow.
So they knew me well, and they knew that like I may have to come by their office and pick up some paperwork, or we may have a planning session around a round table with all the committee members. Well, for those things they were fine with me bringing my children, because they were behaved.
Hmm.
Now if they were running around tearing up the walls and they were like Bebe's kids, it might have been a whole different story. But I had that little talk with them, so they knew. We don't act up in public. We don't hit our brother, we don't hit our sister, those types of things. Now also, Kaylee, my children were a little bit older too. They
Hmm.
weren't babies,
Hmm.
so sometimes if you have children under 5, that's might be a little bit harder because they're antsy.
Right.
It's hard, for them to feel like I got to sit here, and an hour meeting seems like the whole day to them They're like, how long is this going to last, mommy? Kind of thing, But my children were older, so they weren't babies. They were, like 8 and 12 or something of that nature,
Okay.
So they were older because I became a single mother. I was married for almost 16 years,
Okay.
before going through divorce. And so my children were not babies, but still, it was not necessarily during a time where it was popular to take your kids to work every day. You know how you have your take your daughter to work day,
Right.
now take your son to work day, well, I was taking them all the time,
Right.
And the thing about it too is I think for me as a mom, it also helped them to see, what does mommy do when mommy's
Hmm.
gone all the time? What is she doing? Where is she? How, because it's one thing when you tell your kids, I'll be back, mommy's got to go to work, and they don't really understand it. And then also the nature of my work, oftentimes when it was actually time for the event itself, it was night. A lot of events were in the evening. There were dinners, and fundraising dinners and stuff.
Hmm.
So oftentimes I was able to also if it was at a hotel, get a hotel room in the same building where the event was. And my children could stay with me even that way because I'd get them all, and they were old enough. They weren't babies, like I
Hmm.
said, 12, 8, then as time went on, 9, 13, 10,
Right.
14. And they would be able to stay in the room. And that was back in the day when you paid in a hotel room to watch a movie. You had to pay and put money in or whatever. Nowadays, it's all through apps and stuff. But,
Yeah.
we, yeah. So I would tell them, okay, if you're good, I'm gonna get like The Wizard of Oz, and you can watch that. And that was really good because that was a long movie. And so usually by the time the movie was over, they were asleep in the bed,
Mm.
watching it. But then I'd go back up and down, and I'd tell my client, I'll be right back. I need 5 minutes, and I'd go and check on them. And then there were some properties, which are hotels and so forth. They knew me very well. And so oftentimes, like the catering manager and stuff says, Wendy, do you want me to run up and check on the kids? And I would say, yes, don't go in. Just knock on the door and see if they're okay. And if they say yes, and then I had code words that, how we teach our children code words of who you can talk to, who you can't, and what you say and what you don't say. And what's funny is back then it was before cell phones. So
Mm.
it wasn't like my children could just call me up on the cell phone and say, hey, mom, there's some weirdo outside, da 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 da. So I will say too that I really believe there was a protection. God had protection over us at that time too, because you don't ever know when something could happen. But when I needed to take them, I did. And then there's times when I had help where I didn't have to take them and I didn't have to get them out of their comfort zone of their home and that kind of stuff. But the
Mhm.
point being, as a working mom, as a single working mom, I did what I had to do in order to take care of us and to also make sure the children knew that they were part of whatever mommy did.
I like that. I like
Hmm.
that. I like how you had those conversations with them and understanding that they were older makes a little bit more sense. But
Right.
do you feel that someone who has smaller kids could possibly be an event planner or?
Well, I do believe that you can do and be whatever you want and desire to do, but you have to
Mhm.
understand what are the pieces that go with that. So, for example, if you are a mom with younger kids, you may have to have someone that goes with you,
Mm.
whether it's a relative, whether it's a nanny, whether it's a friend, somebody that can help you watch your children. Because if I was distracted by, are my kids doing okay? Are they safe? Whatever it is, I would have not been able to keep my head in the game for my job.
I see.
And so, just understand where you are and that we're
Hmm.
always in different seasons. Like I'm in a different season than you are right now, but I understand your season because I've been there. You don't
Right.
understand my season because you've never been in your 60s and going through all the stuff women in their 60s. But I've been in your shoes before and didn't have twins though, but I still understand what it means to be a mom of young children. And so just understand your boundaries, your restrictions, your limitations for a specific season. And just know that eventually that will pass. But each time there are other things you have to deal with. So, for example, as my children continued to get older, their lives became more active. So that means they've got to get to this practice and this rehearsal and this function. And so if I'm off in a different city doing an event or something, who's getting them there? Who's doing that? And especially if you're a single mom. So you have to be able to really put things in order for where you are with your life at that particular time. And then there's going to be some sacrifices you have to make. We all have sacrifices that we have to make in one way or another, whether it's personal or professional. Sometimes you're going to have to make a choice. I made one choice in my entire career as an entrepreneur that I regretted as it relates to being a mom. Only one. And I actually told my client what I did, and they actually got very upset with me and told me I should have let them know. And they would have said, Wendy, you could have gone. And that is my eldest child is a girl. And my daughter, when she graduated from kindergarten, I missed her graduation from kindergarten, and because it was the day of an event. And that was like the first major milestone for my children, because I mean there were also a lot of other little things where you go and stand in an auditorium and they're looking for you. Where are you? Like as they read something, from their teacher's class or whatever. But I missed her graduation from kindergarten, and that bothered me, and I cried, and like I felt like as a mom I'm what's wrong with me and that kind of thing. And the lesson I learned from that, because I was scared I would lose the job, and it was a major an account. And it's fine if I say it was with McDonald's. I was with McDonald's for over 10 years as their meeting and advisor, did all of the meetings for all the McDonald owners of Southern California.
Wow.
And they had one of their main quarterly meetings, and they were like, Wendy, you did all the work prior. I mean, when we got here on the day of, we could have had someone else step in for you that day or something. But I didn't speak up. So because I was afraid. And as soon as, I told them, because they kept asking me, what's wrong? Because I'm usually very, bubbly and smiley and happy and everything. And I was telling them, I said, today's my daughter's graduation from school and I'm not there. And they said, why aren't you there? And I said, because I'm here with you guys. you know and so it taught me a lesson where if there's something that's a milestone in your life, especially when it comes to your family, speak up, because they're people too, which means they have families also, which means they understand, they care, and
Yeah.
especially if it's something that they can replace you, in some kind of way, which they could have without me losing the job. And so, later on that day, I did leave early from that job. I did get back. I made it to the little school party and it passed. We got through it. And then I made up for it in a rah rah way at home and all that kind of stuff. But don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. Don't be afraid to speak up for what you need for your family. Because also, people who have no compassion and don't care about you and something that's very important to you, do you want to really work with them? Although
Right.
I know there's times when we have to have a job to put food on the table, but, just always think about, your core values and what matters to you, and don't be afraid to speak up for that.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I, in small different things, I always say, like, definitely communicate. You never know. I mean, even if, especially right now in today's economy, some things are really expensive, or, you're maybe falling behind in your bills. And I've learned just to communicate, even with your bill collectors or things like that, especially like electric and stuff like that. Just communicate, let them know your situation. And most times than not, you'll be surprised at what they tell you. So I like that that trickles down even to like what you were saying with work, because all you had to do was communicate and they could have created a solution for you. And
Right.
I do also know how you were feeling, because we all probably have been in a situation where we were scared to share or to let someone know, especially when it comes to our livelihood,
Yes.
because you don't want to lose that pay, you don't want to lose that money for such a large account. So I completely understand both ends, but I like that you had a more positive outcome when you did communicate. So
Mhm.
it's nice to be able to encourage in a scenario like that.
And I think the younger you are, and you start speaking up for yourself, the better, because you
Mhm.
begin to then build those muscles, those skills to speak up. And but there's a
Mhm.
way. It's just like
Right.
I used to tell my children, it's not what you say to me, it's how you say it. So, there's a way that you can share. You can say something like the difference between, I'm not coming here because today's my daughter's graduation, versus, excuse me, may I speak with you? Tomorrow is a very important day for our family and blah blah blah, and I was wondering if such and such, and oh yes, go, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So, be mindful. But I want to step back and make a comment on something that you shared about communication, because to me that's one of the real pet peeves I have, and I just went through it yesterday with someone, is when you're working with someone together, and especially like on this particular point where I am paying someone to do something for me, and 2 weeks have gone by and they don't communicate. And so then finally, yesterday, we had a scenario. I actually had to have my husband call him. And all of a sudden, very chatty. And so I'm like, how come you haven't returned my calls or my text messages or my emails? And he had reasons or whatever. I said, but it only took one email to say to me, I'm out of town. I've got to do this. I haven't forgotten about your project. I will get back with you. So
Mhm.
communication is key, and especially in relationship building, because for me, being the type of person that I connect a lot of dots, which means if I'm waiting on something from you, it may be because it's a project I'm working on for this person who's trying to do it for this person. So now you've affected everybody in that whole matrix system because you're not communicating. Because then
Mhm.
I don't know what to say to the next person. So communication is key in life, whether it's personal or professional, whether it's in your relationship or whether it's in your career. Communicating, positive or negative, whatever it may be, or could I just have a little bit more time? Or, you know what? I think I can do a better job on this, but can I have one more day? Something. So I would agree with you that yes, just we need to make sure that we're communicating.
Yeah, in my time being an entrepreneur and just different things, I've just learned that, like you said, sometimes it's just always better to communicate and share what's
Yes.
going on. And a lot of times people are more understanding than you think they are, and especially if it's how you say it. How you say it is very, very important. So I know that you said with your event planning, it kind of was happenstance, like it just kind of like happened to be something that you fell into.
It
Were
is.
there any other resources or anything that you used to establish the business? Like, what did that look like?
So, a couple of things. I always talk about I fell into event planning, but you really don't fall into something. Really, what happens is there's a scripture. I don't remember where it is, but it says that, and maybe it's not even a scripture, to be honest with you. Maybe it's just a saying in church. I don't know. Anyway, right now, that says your gifts will make room for you, which means what you know how to do will open doors for you, is basically what that means. And so what happened was I was doing things. I was moving forward. I was volunteering and everything. And people began to take notice. They loved how I was always, my grandmother always said to be on time is late. So I was always early, because early means on time.
Mhm.
So they started noticing that I was dependable, that if I said I was going to be there, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be there early. So they're not fretting like at that last minute, like, is she going to get here? What's going on? Like that. Number two, I communicated. Number three, I was organized. I am the binder queen. Now, I am learning how to transfer that to technology, but my generation, I am, if you look behind me, I am the binder queen. Everything has a home, and it has a label. So I know exactly where everything is and so forth. So they knew that I was organized. They knew I was going to be on time. And then they knew I did my homework. I did my research. So if they needed a particular type of caterer or entertainment or MC or fundraiser or graphic designer or whatever it was, that because my job as an event planner is to pull all those pieces together. And they knew that I was going to find the best deal for them, that not necessarily was the cheapest, but the best. not the most expensive and lavish, because a lot of my clients were really more in the fundraising space, like charities and nonprofits. Now, when you start doing high society galas, money's not usually they don't care because they want opulence, or they want the more the better for them. Whereas when you're dealing with charities, they want quality and they want it to be memorable, but also the majority of the money needs to go to the cause, not to doing the event. So, and then they also had to pay me. So that's also another expense, which means my job is to try to help keep down all the other expenses. So when you say, like, what else did I whether bring to the table or have as it relates to going into event planning, my skills, my gifts made room for me. I just didn't know that there was a career called event planning. I didn't know that back then. I mean, everybody's an event planner nowadays, and everybody's a coach nowadays.
Right.
But back then it wasn't quite the same. So you don't know what you don't know until you learn it, till you find out.
Right. And how did you get organized? I mean, that is still an issue for me sometimes. So is that something that you were just natural at, or are there specific skills that you can suggest for those that are struggling to be more organized?
Yeah. I would say, so from Auntie Wendy, you don't call everybody mom, and everybody's not grandma, but a lot of people you call auntie, where you might get some advice or something that's going to help your life. I think it starts with personal habits. So for example, I have a habit, and sometimes it drives my husband crazy, that you pick as you go. So pick up stuff as you go. Don't leave a mess. Pick up as you go. Also, when you get up in the morning, make your bed. I mean, the first thing, make your bed. That may seem like a little thing, but you've accomplished something for the day. I see you trying to smile at that. And it also helps that when you go back and look at your room for whatever reason, you feel like, okay, it looks neat, kind of thing. If you wash clothes, don't just throw them on the couch and leave. Fold them right then. And if you don't have time, leave them in the dryer so you're not looking at them. And if people walk in your house, they're not sitting on them. You know what I mean? And it's just it starts with personal habits.
Okay.
Are your drawers neat? Are your closets neat? Or does, if somebody opens your closet, everything's going to just fall on out because you just keep throwing stuff in there and shoving the door. So I believe it starts with personal habits. The other thing is, nowadays, technology, there's so many things that can help you. I would even be way more efficient and organized if I was really able to master. And I'm not going to say if I'm able to, because I'm getting there. That's one of my goals in my 60s, is to become more efficient technology-wise. But until you get there, like I said, I still keep a paper calendar. Everybody cracks up at me until their computers go out or have a malfunction and they can't find anything. I'm like, got it right here. Now, I have also learned how to back it up on my phone for important calendar dates. Like, you were in my phone, you were in my calendar, as well as in my paper calendar. But in my paper calendar, I also keep track of birthdays, anniversaries, things like that. And each year when I get a new one of these, I just transfer it over so that I don't forget or don't lose. And then I create cheat sheets. Like, here's a little, I don't try to show all the business, but here's a little cheat sheet right here in front that I have that makes sure I don't forget at least my husband, my children, and grandchildren's birthday. Because as your family grows, you start thinking, okay, when is my first grandchild's birthday or the last one, So I have a little cheat sheet there too, but I also have it in the calendar. So I would recommend just find what works for you, but do it consistently. And then there's just like, I'll give some other little tips that's always worked with me in terms of being organized or whatever. And that is, I always keep a stack of cards. I will tell you, I used to always have birthday cards and things like that. But believe it or not, the resource where I used to go to get all of them went out of business. So it's been a little bit harder for me to keep those on hand. But I do always keep a stack of blank, nice cards. And then I'm also a stamp queen. So like, I have one that says, happy birthday. So I can just get out the old little ink pad and and put happy birthday on the blank card. And
I
I
didn't.
and I have that for so many things. Like I even have this thank you. So if I don't have a thank you card, I could just do pop 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 thank you.
Okay,
And
so real quick,
yeah,
to listeners, this is my auntie, and and she is not lying. Okay, she never forgets a birthday. She will even send, if she knows you're going through something, or if there's something that you're struggling with, or what have you. She will send you anything, encouragement, things like that. So with that being said, to see her behind the scenes of that, and to know that it has stamps and things, I'm like, oh, that's genius. Because I will say, as I embarked on my entrepreneurial journey, of course, she's someone that I took a lot of inspiration and motivation from, and of course, counsel and things like that. And sending cards has been a huge set you apart, especially in my generation. A lot of people my age, I'm in my late 20s, a lot of people my age don't send cards or mail things or have stamps and stuff like that. So that has definitely set me apart. So I love that tip. And I love the tip of, I was always wondering, like, man, when I get a blank card, I guess I have, decent handwriting, but that stamp is that's genius. So I did want to just say that real
and
quick.
you also need to always make sure you have postage stamps handy.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, and postage stamps are getting so expensive, but a
You
lot of
have to go to the post office. I don't
right,
know. It's like something like there's little like annex shops
right,
and stuff like that. Those ones are going to be significantly more money for stamps than like the post office. But
correct. That's true. Because a lot of times I think we have good intentions, but they say that the road to whatever is paved with good intentions. I don't want to say the word. But the thing about it is preparation. When you stay prepared,
Mhm.
then you don't have to get prepared. And that's with anything in life. Again, another tip, stay prepared and you don't have to get prepared. So I try to keep certain supplies handy because you are correct. That is another, I would say, signature of me as a business owner that my clients have always loved is I send my clients birthday cards, even like 5, 10 years later, and they'll say, oh my gosh. And you know what? I've actually gotten business repeat again just because they received something from me and it just happened to be during a time when they were about to do something and they were like, Wendy, but they hadn't thought of me or anything in 5 years, maybe because we did an event 5 years ago, or I coached them, 5 years ago or whatever. And that card is a way, and it's also personal that you took the time to write it and put it in the mail. But if you're prepared and you have the cards handy and the stamps handy, nothing can hold you back from getting it done. So that's part of being prepared. I'll give you one other little tip on that. That's a good family tip and business tip is I also have what I call my treasure chest. And in my treasure chest, I have little gifts. So the majority of my gifts lean more towards women because the majority of the my clients are women, but I always have something handy that I can throw together with a nice little gift bag and tissue. So those are some other things you have to, like, in advance. You find tissue paper on sale or gift bags on sale, that you can just put aside so that when you're going to a meeting and you find out that morning as you're talking to them, they tell you, oh yes, tomorrow's my birthday. So da da da, ding 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 ding, because I wouldn't have known that. And now I have my little card, my little stamp, and I also can take, and that will take me all less than 5 minutes to put together before I walk out the door to the clients. And then for family, somebody's coming over and, oh, you're like, oh shoot, that's right, their birthday is this week. You can throw a little goodie, together, and then it makes people know that you care.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And then as a receiver of that, I have always enjoyed getting that. So, yes.
Remember, don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you can be smart at a whole lot of things, but if they don't think you care about whatever's important to them or to them specifically, they're going to go to, possibly the next person. The other thing too that I remember, and since now your audience knows we're family, our grandmother would always talk about was sometimes things don't always go to the swift, but it does go to the one who rises early. And so that was one of her sayings was get up. Mother dear was all about get up, get up. And like, why? It's dark outside, and she say, while you're sleeping, somebody else is doing something and everything. And I'm like, but I'm not trying to do what they're doing. And so, but it taught me a really good lesson that I know for a fact that sometimes I was not always the smartest girl in the room. I was not always the most qualified, even if I'm honest, at a particular job or whatever. But nobody could outwork me. Nobody could outorganize me. Nobody could ever outdo me being early, being kind. Kindness is something people are missing, being kind and thoughtful. And when you're all those things and you have a good heart and you mean well, people will work with you. And if you don't know something, back to that communication, and they say, and you tell them, they're like, oh, well, we'll figure it out together. All of a sudden now they're really willing to work out a lot of stuff with you because they see you're really caring and you're in it. You're trying, you're in it, And a good example of that is when I first got into event planning 100 years ago, no, in 1992, which probably seems like 100 years ago to you. But when I first got into it, event planning was separate from fundraising and PR. Where the lines got blurred and people start to think that if you hire an event planner, that event planner has to be also the person that helps you also raise the money and also do the PR for it. Because that wasn't like, even to this day, those are three different skill sets. And those are three different jobs. But in my world and a lot of the community I was serving, they had limited budgets to hire three different people. So either you had to learn it and figure it out, or they're going to maybe go to someone else. And so I remember the first time that I was working with a client and we were putting together the event, and then they wanted to know, they're like, okay, so now how are you going to help us raise the money? What? My job is to organize the event, So I had to start thinking about it. And I was very blessed that I have a sister who happens to also be your auntie, that had started coming to work with me at the time for my company. And she was very good at like graphic design and collateral materials and everything. And we started coming up with sponsor level sheets. That's what everybody does now. But back then, that was still a kind of a new thing. So then we started trying to figure out, okay, who could pay $10,000 for this and $5,000 for this and $2,500 for this and $100 for that, or whatever. And they were like, oh, okay, so not only just selling tickets, but selling ads in the program books so that you had an ad in there, And what about signage? Let's get their name up on a sign as people come in. So it started out real kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing on this fundraising thing, to the point where I became very well known as being an event planner that could also help you, raise money, which was help set me apart. And then they were like, okay, well, but how are we going to get the word out? And that was before we had a strong presence of social media. Now it's a little bit easier because social media and there's all kind of platforms where you can definitely promote and do the PR for. But because I had relationships with newspapers and different things, and back to that other sister who had a magazine, I could start to negotiate deals where the clients could pay for some advertising space in her magazine, but paid less because they were my client. So it helped my sister and her magazine, it helped the client, and helped me as relates to making sure they had PR. And then I started making friends with people on radio and stuff, and then I had a radio show, and so it's kind of like your gifts will make room for you. You just have to get out there and keep trying and keep moving forward. And some things you're going to learn aren't for you. I was, matter of fact, side note, nothing to do with event planning or coaching or anything. I was going down the street the other day in my car and I saw this big old sign and it said, become a nurse today. And I looked at the sign and I thought, but that one's not for me. Yeah. That's just not my lane, you know.
Hmm.
The thought of working in a hospital, hands go up and my heart goes out to all those who first responders and everybody because they're amazing. I mean, I could not do that, you know. Now
Hmm.
raising some money to help them do that, that's a whole nother story. But you got to know your lanes, and if you don't know your lanes, you're always going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling.
I wanted to ask, so with your event planning, how did you like when you started to scale? What did that look like? How did you learn how to hire people? How did you know when you needed help? Because it sounds like you started to, eventually handle bigger projects. So what did that look like when you needed help?
Well, when I was in the height of my event planning, which is when I made a lot of money, that usually came because it means I had a lot of clients.
Hmm.
And there's only so much bandwidth one person can be and do. So I started realizing, okay, I need, and then I first started delegating or designating what kind of help do I need. And so
Hmm.
that's how you figure out who's the first person I needed to hire. And then I thought, okay, all these people can't come to my house. So I had to get an office. So then you have to start dealing with budgets because now you got a budget for office space, insurance, workers' comp, payroll, and then keeping the lights on in your office and utilities. And then now you have employees who want snacks in the work break room, and I mean, there's all these things you have to start thinking about that you weren't thinking about when you're a solopreneur, and you are a what's called hired gig work, where you just hire people for the day of a project, but they don't necessarily work with you all the way. So it was something that I had to learn, but again, being organized again helped me. And I also started talking to people and I took some classes and I just did stuff like, what do I need to know? And I remember the first time when I hired a lady who came from corporate and she was like, okay, and I need this in my package and I need this as part of my, I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, let me figure this out, and but she was correct, she was right. And so you learn as you go, and then again you have to start to scale based on what you can handle, because then what happens is, which I have to say, I'm very, very grateful. I never once took out a loan for my business. I never went into debt over my business. I did not grow faster than what was coming in. I grew as stuff was coming in, but I was always a good saver. And you know that too, that in life, I've always been a good saver. So another thing our grandmother taught us, live below your means. So back in those days when I was making that close to $500,000 a year, which is gross, not net, because that's when I still had employees and I had an office space and, all this stuff. So that was not my net, that was my gross at that time. But still, when you have that kind of money coming through your hands, you have to also start to think about, okay, I can't go out right now and go buy that Bentley or that diamond necklace or whatever just because I see that money coming in. No, I had to figure out, okay, what's my annual budget? What do I need to run my business? But then also, what do I need to be putting away? Because when you're an entrepreneur and you do the type of work we do, it can go like this. It can also go like this. So you got to be prepared. So when the pandemic hit, it did go like that for me. And if I had not prepared, I would not be sitting here like this today, because it got hard. It got hard during the pandemic financially. Well, it got hard for everybody all kind of ways during the pandemic. But if I had not stopped and thought about, okay, Wendy, what is your business budget, but what's your personal budget, and stay within that. And I've always been grateful that I've been able to do that, because then it helps you when you go through the lean times, but it also helps you to be a person to help other people when they're in need. And that's part of my core value for myself, is just I want to be a blessing and when I can.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And when it comes to the budget, did you like, was it classes that you took? I know you said people that you talked to and stuff, but like where, because I feel like a struggle for a lot of people, especially when they are getting large sums of money coming to their hands, and it's so easy to flaunt and so easy to flash, and people think that they have to show their money to somehow correlate with their success of their business. But as long as your business is there, it's successful.
You know what I
People don't
want to say?
realize that.
People I know that I personally have known well
Mm-hmm.
never know that they were rich because they didn't try to keep up with the Joneses. You know what I mean? There was a gentleman named Mr. Lincoln who I worked for a period of time. A client was Claremont Lincoln University. And Mr. Lincoln was the founder of the university. Wonderful man. He's now passed on. Met him, worked with him, and he was worth millions and millions. Like he gave like 50 million to start Claremont Lincoln. He gave like 45 million to Scripps College because his wife went there. He gave some kind of amount of millions to Harvard. He gave millions, I mean, to this hospital. I mean, when I say millions, millions. And do you know this man, when he had a home in Arizona, and sometimes I would have to travel with the president to Arizona to do projects and work. And he would pick us up in his car. Do you know his car was like a 10-year-old Honda with the armrest broken? And I remember the first time I said, Mr. Lincoln, don't you want a different car? And he said, why? This one runs just fine. You know? So a lot of times people with money don't have anything to prove.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they know they can
Mm-hmm.
do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want.
Mm-hmm.
And they invest more in eternal things. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they invest in, if they're a faith in their church or community, in helping relief missions, helping schools, helping hospitals. They're not. This man, I kid you not, I've seen it with my own eyes. He would come to Claremont from Arizona and take a bus from the airport. This man could have a private jet. You know what I'm saying? So,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what was important to him. Now I am not putting down influencers and people who do what they do,
Yeah.
because that's what they do, whatever. But I'm just saying, when you're asking about budgets and you're asking about running your businesses, don't keep up with other people. Keep your eyes focused. And I know that's difficult in our days because everywhere you turn on social media and whatever, everybody's like, well, look at me, or whatever. But, a couple years from now, they're going to be like, don't look at me. So just don't worry about that. Think of the long journey, the long run, and then figure out what it is you want. What is it that
Mm-hmm.
you actually want, and what is it going to take to get that? And so back to part of your original question, and that is, as I was developing the budget, some of it, all I had to do was look at my credit cards and my checkbook to see what was I spending money on in the business. And so that becomes a line item. And then I could see, okay, how often am I doing that? How often am I buying toilet paper and paper towels for the office? How often am I, whatever it is, so that I can begin to see, okay, patterns and how much I need to, make sure I'm setting aside. And then you got to start thinking about, oh, I have to have business insurance. Oh, workers' comp. Oh, so, and then what I started doing was going to talk to people that had their own businesses. Some had similar businesses as I did, but some didn't, because there's certain expenses that will be particular to your particular industry. But there's also just straight business expenses that you might not think about,
Mm-hmm.
that anybody who has run a successful business can share with you. So that's what I did, is I really listened. A lot of times younger people would do better if they just listen a little bit more, just listen. And just like we have to listen to you guys about certain things that we don't know, there's things we know that we can kind of help you from not bumping your head a few times on the wall, like, been there, done that. Let's turn right here so that you don't do that, kind of thing. But when people think that, no, I got it, I got this, like, okay, so just be willing to listen and to learn from other people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because I do understand the perspective of, I think, coming from a young person, when sometimes we're like, oh, we got it, we got it. I think it's like we're trying to be creative and trying to think outside the box and be innovative. But I do understand where you're coming from, because it's saying like, yes, but they're still basic and there's foundational things. And I'm glad that I'm starting to learn that a little bit earlier, because yeah, like understanding foundational things, relationship building, budgeting,
Mhm.
a lot of that stuff, you can't build anything without a solid foundation. And I think what you're trying to say is trying to help us with that and make sure that, we're not having to fall as much as you did. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing all this, because it's really helping me and I'm able to apply this to my scenario. So I wanted to ask, you were saying that you grew as your business grew. I'm trying to formulate my question, because I like how you said that, because some people think, oh, well, my business is growing. These are the projections. These are the numbers. These are the hypothesis of where my business is going. And then they take out that loan, or they do something and life happens and it doesn't do as well as the hypothesis. So what did that look like?
Mhm.
How did you grow,
Well,
as what it looked like?
that's a good question, because there was a period of time when I'll say I was like, like let's say you're like here and then go like that. And I was here. And I had friends who were like, oh, you should move to LA and you should buy a house over here and you should get an office in this part of town and blah, blah, blah. And I started thinking about it and I was like, that would be kind of like sexy. That would be kind of like, I did this, kind of. But then I stopped and thought about what's wrong with what I'm doing with the way I'm doing it right now. And what's the cost difference? I started looking at the cost difference and it was major. It was like almost 100%. I was going to take me, which means that now I would have been, how they say you should, is it eat to live, not live to eat? Like don't get
Mm-hmm,
it by just
mm-hmm,
trying to eat or whatever. Eat to live.
mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing as that I would have been working just to keep that treadmill going, or that what do you call it? The
The
little
rat
hamster
race.
wheel, yeah. Versus really building a business that was touching lives. See, I know for a fact, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my businesses, because I know we don't have much more time, but I segued out of event planning into coaching and consulting. And some of the same clients followed me. And then, of course, I've had new clients. And I did that on purpose because the event industry was changing, sponsorships were changing, but also I was changing. And some of the needs of my clients were changing. And I grew with that change. And I'm still using my gifts in what I do today. But what I was going to also comment on is that because you don't know what's ahead or what's to come, always stay close and centered to your core values, And for me, my core values were not just making a living, not just doing events and now coaching and consulting, but am I touching lives? Am I helping people along the way? And when I had all those employees, the majority of my employees were single women. Some were moms. Some, they needed me. I needed them, but they needed me. And they also learned skills working with me that they didn't have or didn't know they have, that I brought out because we had to, we needed them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to take that and go on to something else even bigger and better. So to know that I was a stepping stone, and I'm still in touch to this day with several people who have worked with my company over the years, been able to give out grants, been able to help small businesses get started in different ways. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was constantly trying to keep up with the Joneses, or go into lanes that weren't for me.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, me staying where I live, me staying in the general area of how I worked, was also better for my children, because I didn't have to uproot them. They had friends, they had their own lives here. So you have to look at the whole picture. Don't be selfish. Don't just look at yourself and say what you want. If you are a mom and your show is all about helping moms be their best selves and helping them to be able to have the best lives they can for them and their children and their families. And I would say, just always keep that at center mind, because you're always going to be tempted to try to do more, want more, have more, and more is not always better. And as you
Mm-hmm.
get older, less is really wonderful. It really is, like all this stuff. I'm just ready to get rid of all this stuff, kind of thing. And, it's simple. Just want the simple life, kind of thing. So,
So you did event planning in the beginning of your career.
yes.
And then how did you segue to doing coaching? Where did that transition come in?
Okay, so a couple of things. The whole event industry was changing, and in complete transparency, I wasn't changing fast enough with it. And what I mean by that is it was becoming more technical. For example, I was still having where my ladies were checking people in on a piece of paper or whatever. And I started going to events and noticing people had like these little small computers that they were checking people on computers. And then I was going to basically an interview where you have to give a proposal. And sometimes they would have multiple event planners come at the same time. And I noticed all of a sudden people had an iPad or whatever, and then they would flip it over and they would show, so this is how I envision your room is going to look, and blah, blah, blah. And
Ooh.
what is that? And so that I just was like, okay, Wendy, you're becoming a dinosaur in this industry, because they were younger too than I was and everything. Now that doesn't mean you can't be older, because another family member of ours, your grandmother, is in the event space, and she's older because she's older than me. And she has migrated over to that technical world very well, but that's because she hired younger people that taught her and helped to make all that come to pass. And I just wasn't I think I had lost my drive, to be honest. I was tired too. I was burnt out. I mean, I got burnt out, tired. I was like, do I feel like really learning all this stuff and everything like that? I said no. And then I had a house that I was going to have to get out of, that I was using for my office space in Pasadena, where I had 7 full-time employees. And so we were transitioning with that. The industry was changing. Also, the sponsorship side of things was changing. That's when around 96, I think it was. No, 2006. I can't even remember now. Time gets away from me. I'm so sorry. But no, it wasn't 96. It was in the 2000 something. Maybe it was
It definitely
2000.
was, because I went to that house. So
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Usually you start to try to think, how old were your kids? And then you can kind of go back and count. Oh, that's when that was. Anyway, when I also was coming to that decision is when you had to start now going online, which is now technology again, to apply for grants for sponsorships for events. And I didn't have that skill set yet. I mean, I do now, but I didn't then. And I was like, oh gosh, that's just another thing I got to learn. So and then what I started learning and realizing was people were also now trying, instead of hiring an event planner, they wanted to hire a consultant to teach their staff how to do it. And I was like, I could do that. And then they also were starting to hire me, like, how much would you charge me to help me to understand strategic engagement of who I need to connect with to do different things that my company needs? I could do that. And then all of a sudden, people start asking me my opinion of stuff. And I was like, my opinion, And so that transferred into coaching. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go back to school. So I went back to school, and I actually went to school through the International Coaching Federation, ICF, which is the most well-known coaching federation.
And how old were you at this time, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, geez. Okay. Probably about 15 years ago. So like late 40s, because I'm going to be 64. So like 49, 48, something like that. And so then I went back to school and got my certification for coaching. And then I also decided to go back to school because of the types of questions people were asking me. And I went to Washington, D.C. to the Protocol School of Washington. So I am actually a certified from the Protocol School of Washington on protocol and etiquette. So, and a lot of times when people think of, protocol, they think military, and when they think etiquette, they think of what utensils you use to eat, and all of that is part of it, but there's more to it. I mean, there's protocol on how you address someone. And see, I started to have clients that were navigating or migrating from one field to another. So for example, I had a leader who was over a nonprofit who decided to go into politics, who happens to
Mm.
currently be a mayor. And I had other clients that were leads of nonprofits that went into politics, who went into the state assembly and Congress. And so they're starting to ask questions because they had never been in that field. And a lot of them end up hiring people for their staff that help with all of that. But there's rules how you address someone or how you dress for somewhere, and depending on who you're meeting with, can you give a gift or not? Because like now, for example, you're not supposed to give gifts to political people, but hey, what can I say? So there's rules. And so I found that very enjoyable. So I went back to school to learn that. Spent a lot of money on getting more education in different areas, but it's all been very well worth it because it's helped me help my clients to grow. So for me, I realized when there was a line that kind of came and said, it's time for me to kind of transition. And it wasn't necessarily easy, but it wasn't difficult because Kaylee, it always goes back to your gifts will make room for you. I navigated and migrated over into things that people were asking me about that I liked and I enjoyed. For example, how to even write a letter. That's part of the protocol school. And back then it was like, how do I address someone? And if this is a formal letter, how do I even give somebody a letter of recommendation? Nowadays you can kind of Google stuff and use AI and whatever. But back then that wasn't there. So somebody had to teach you, show you, and help you. So all the things that I've done, they kind of have been birthed out of what I was doing even previously, even going back to acting. Because when I was an actress, I started as an extra, started getting some small roles, got to be a regular on a few shows, but I made relationships with celebrities. So, for example, when I had an event doing a celebrity basketball game for Nestle 100 years ago, it was easy for me then to kind of go back to my network, my relationships of people that I would send notes and cards to and say, hey, I'm doing this celebrity basketball game. Could you help me? Or do you know somebody in the industry that would be willing to play? And also, that's how I met my current husband back then, which was about 30 years ago. So the thing about it is, if you stop and look at everything you do in life, sometimes we think, oh, I failed at that or I didn't succeed. No, don't look at it like that. Look at what lessons did you learn? What nuggets can you take away that you take to the next thing that you do? It's just like Edison. Edison did all kind of inventions, and it wasn't until the light bulb, which some people say he didn't even really do that. Somebody else helped him with that. But whatever. With history, the point being, there's a lot of people that fail before they win. So, but it's not even failure because you just take those lessons with you. And now I still do events from time to time. I just don't do the type of events I did before. So for example, if I'm coaching someone, and let's say if I was coaching you, and then through our coaching and consulting, you decide you're going to open an office and you want to have a grand opening. And you say, well, could you help me with that? Sure. See, I will do that. I mean, I've got the big old scissors that you use like at the Chamber of Commerce, opening. We do the ribbons. We do the little champagne. We make sure that the Chamber of Commerce is there and you have your invitee list. I help with that. Because see, I'm not doing sponsorships. I don't have to hire a ton of staff to get that done for you. So when I have a client that has an event that fits within the wheelhouse that I am doing now that helps that client, I still do event planning, which is why sometimes people think, I thought you got out of event planning. I have to some degree, but that doesn't mean I still won't help. I don't go after new clients for event planning. I help clients who I'm already working with that are trying to do an event.
I really appreciate that. And real quick, just a little bit of an ad. I am really appreciating that you are my aunt, and I didn't know a lot of these facets that you had. I didn't really know what coaching or what your past with event planning really was and how it encompassed. And I'm like so intrigued, and I'm like, wow, even though we have an age gap and things like that, as someone trying to rebuild and rebrand and, find their purpose, I'm now understanding the purpose partner and where you got that new title, because I'm like, how can I work with my auntie to find my purpose? And I understand what I'm doing here with mothering holistically, but there's just so many things that you can help with, and even me being young, and I feel like you have so much that you can bring to the table for older women, younger women. So this is really nice, and mothering holistically is just here to amplify everyday moms' voices. And
Yeah.
even though Miss Wendy doesn't seem every day, it really is every day. She's living life every day. She has a husband, she has kids, she has grandkids, and she's also doing more that seems beyond every day, but it's really every day. And she's being very relatable, and she's sharing her story and practical tips and inspiration. So this is what we do. We empower moms to embrace every season of motherhood with confidence and pursue their dreams with resilience. And just as a new mom myself, I truly appreciate these tips and these stories. And so if there's anyone else that has anything that they want to share, please definitely connect with me. We do have a jot form that I add to every video, but it's also on our Instagram at Mothering Holistically. You can find the link in the bio. It's a really quick jot form, just your name and your email. That way we can reach out to you and get you on the show, because everyone has something to share, and everyone is living a life that we could learn from. So I just wanted to briefly touch upon that, because I was really touching my heart, and I was like, wow, I knew the overview of what you did, but I didn't know this in depth, and I'm really amazed. This is so awesome how you've been able to pivot. And I'm thinking of Ross, pivot from Friends. No, but it's that's awesome how you've been able to pivot, and you saw when you weren't willing to continue, or you're like, hey, they got iPads, they got this, I don't really want to learn that, but I'm able to now pivot over here with the lessons that I've learned. I'm just like, that's entrepreneur definition, is figuring it out, pivoting when you need to, understanding when you need to hire someone, not doing it with debt. I'm just amazed. You always amaze me, but being able to go more in depth like this, I'm amazed, and this is awesome. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm very proud of you. And you have that entrepreneurial spirit too, and it kind of runs through our blood, being entrepreneurial, and then of course family. So just keep doing what you're doing, and if I can ever do anything again for you, I'm always here. And if I can share any information, and I just would like to end today, so to speak, for your guests, that just be true to yourself, and also know there's nothing wrong with asking for help. When you don't know something, ask for help. And that's really what a coach is, a purpose partner. That's what I am, the purpose partner. Women hire me because I like working with women to help them find their way. Because a lot of times we have crossroads. All of us do at some point. And we have to learn how to become unshakable. That means your roots have to go deep. That means you got to be solid and understand. And then be able to walk out of that with strategic grace. And be kind, be loving to yourself as well as to others. That's what it means about even holistically. You got to also take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of someone else, at least, and do a very good job. So, again, Kaylee, thank you for having me as your guest. I'm here for you always and forever.
Thank you. No, I love that, and definitely being true to yourself, because I don't know how many of you know, but I'm a licensed massage therapist and a licensed esthetician, and I took a school bus and turned it into a spa, and I sold it before I had started my family and got married and things, but it really put me in a rut. I was so excited when I did it. Building that with 75% sweat equity was crazy. It was something that I just figured out, and I felt so good about it. I was so proud of myself for
It's
doing that.
beautiful.
And thank you. And when I sold it, it really, really put me in a rut. And then having children and losing myself within that, trying to find my way back is basically how Mothering Holistically was formed. But, you know, I'm glad that everything that I've done just to be who I am and lean into that. And if you're struggling with finding what you're good at or figuring out where you need to go, I truly, truly recommend Miss Wendy. She is the purpose partner, and you can learn more about her on her website at wendygladney.com. And then you can also follow her on social media. That's at Wendy Gladney. You can find her on Facebook and Instagram. And she will also be starting her new podcast, The Purpose Partner Path. So I'm really excited to start listening to that, and hopefully she'll come back on and grace us again, because I feel like we definitely need a part 2 of this, because there was so much that I wish we could have, dove into further, but of course we're running out of time. But man, I learned so much. I learned so much when I talked to you, but this was truly a blessing. So thank you so much for joining us. And then of course you can follow me at KBERLINEE on all social media platforms. Again, look out for that jot form, because it's really quick, and we would love to hear your story, and we would love for you to join us on the show. You can also follow Mothering Holistically on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram Facebook just mirrors the Instagram, but this is where we put sneak peeks, and this is where it's everything centered around the podcast. So anything that you need to know, like basically the advertisement for this live today and links and things, are on the Mothering Holistically Instagram. So you definitely want to follow that to see all those sneak peeks and stay informed on the show. So if you like this episode and feel it resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up by clicking that like button. And if you feel it could touch or encourage someone that you know, please share it. And also subscribe while hitting that notification bell to never miss a weekly episode. Until next time, remember to mother holistically and thrive authentically. I'm your host, KBERLINEE, and together we're winning. Bye, y'all.